All right, guys. Sorry that I'm not here this morning, but I'm out in West Texas. I left on Sunday afternoon and drove all the way out to Lubbock, Texas. I'm here until late tonight, and I'll be going home. I thank Allison for filling in for me today. By now, she's already given you the quiz that I left for you. So we're going to pick up kind of where we left off last week in your books. In your books on page 32, I think it is. We were finishing up this concept of that it had developed here. It was a long process of millions and billions of years uh, that started with an innate matter that was the size of a dime, and then something, a first cause happened. But anyway, we get through all of that. We were talking about this guy named Peebles on page 31 and his concept of what that looked like. And we finished at the top of page 32 with this statement, which is about the third line down. So I hope by now you're there because this is where you're going to need to start with me. Um, he said this in 1994. Again, he's the one that came up with all the details that we talked about yesterday, exactly what happened, the chronology of all of that after the Big Bang and the expansion of that and what that looked like. And he's in 19 and he won a Nobel Prize in physics for that. 1994, he said this: our understanding of the Genesis, and Genesis just simply means the beginning, and the evolution, that means the change. The genesis and evolution of the universe is one of the greatest achievements of the 20th century in science. And he says that as a compliment and a statement of fact. The fact that we understand everything about it, beginning with the beginnings, the genesis, and then the concept of the evolution, the changes, and all the things that took place, is in fact one of the greatest scientific achievements of the 20th century. That was 1994. Um, in an article published by the same cosmologists that were publishing his work later on, quoted him. So in 1994, he said, "This is it. We've got it figured out. Man, there's nothing else that would ever change that." And then the Nobel Committee, remember, he won the Nobel Prize. The Nobel Committee last month honored Peebles for his work since the 1960s, developing the now prevalent theoretical framework for what? The young universe. But he is careful to note that he does not know about the beginning. Okay? The concept is we're going to talk to him about the young universe that's only 15 billion years old. And yet the concept that was famous for was that it's always been there. The universe has always been there, but that at some point it began, but that in fact it's a young universe, which is contrary to the concept of eternal. Last week we talked about an eternal clock, and that as time was not in existence, there's no young, there's no old, but that he then began to claim that there was this young universe. Now, we as creationists don't disagree with the young universe. Our take on that is, though, that the young universe is not 15 billion years old, but only a few thousand years old. And we'll look at that as we go along. But he's also careful to say he really doesn't know about the actual beginning. While we understand the genesis and the evolution, we really don't know the beginnings. And so they're using a context here of an assumption that is unprovable. But the theory behind that, the evidence for that is there's no evidence to counter that, so therefore it must be true. It is unfortunate that one thinks of the beginning whereunto, in fact, we have no good theory of such a thing as in the beginning. It's what he said in an interview. So listen, we don't have any information, but yet this is what we believe. And so when we're talking about this multiple competing hypotheses, the truth is, for him to make that confession after having proclaimed what he proclaimed, says, wait a minute, we're not really sure that that's exactly the way it is or not. He says that in that paragraph. This is from an article at psychology.org from 2019. By contrast, we do have a well-tested theory of evolution from an early state to the present time, starting with the first few seconds of expansion. After we said that was the Big Bang, after that, the first seconds of time, which have left cosmological signatures referred to as the fossils. And so now, based upon the fossil record, which we have in a very short time, but compared to the 15 billion years ago, when the universe came into existence, none of that was there. So because there's no evidence to point to it way back at that point in time, the furthest we can go back is the fossil record. And the fossil record, because of the way we interpret it, points to what we showed you back there because of the processes. And we'll talk about this concept much more as we get into it. It's called universalism or uniformitarianism. And that just basically means this, that the way to prove why something is you take it backwards at a steady, slow, incremental recession, all the way back with no outside influences, with no disruption of that. But because of that steady change, that evolution that they talk about, that takes us back to this. But that only goes back to a few million years ago, not billion years ago. And so the whole concept of it's always been here just doesn't carry any weight. The Big Bang, which is purported and cause, is in fact the effect. Let me say that again too. The Big Bang is not the cause, it's the effect. The first cause, they have no idea. Why would something that is innate, that has been innate forever, that has never had any instance of animation, and what I mean by that is it's dead. I've never, except in the Bible, when I read about the work of God, by the way, there is no God in this framework. It's just stuff. It's just there. It's just always been there. Where'd it come from? We don't know. How long has it been there? Forever. What caused the change? We don't know. But we do know that whatever caused the change and whatever was the first cause, the effect was what we call the Big Bang. It exploded, and as it began to expand, within a few billion years has become everything that exists today. The universe, even as small as a dime, was already in existence. So that conclusion says, I don't understand how it could come from nothing if it was already here. With that conclusion in place, the most simple position that must be addressed is beyond the explanation of science. If it was already there and it has been there, how did it get there? Why is it there? And how did it get there? That position is known as the cosmological argument, or Kalam cosmological argument. Kalam was the professor, the scientist that began to ask that question. Wait. You say it's been there, but you don't tell me why. There's got to be a reason for everything, but you don't have a reason. And when you begin to look at this logically, again, we're looking at this from the standpoint of scientific logic, facts that are in place. There are three things that this argument, this cosmological argument states. Number one, you ought to know these because you're going to see them again. They're in your book, I think from the bottom of page 32. I suggest you highlight them or circle them or something. It is based upon the argument of three simple, known and accepted premises. These are not scientific theories. These are premises by which we establish a set of guidelines. Number one, whatever began has to have a cause. Whatever began has to have a cause. There can be no effect without a cause. You tell me the effect is the Big Bang, but you can't give me a cause. So that's principle number one. Whatever begins has a cause. Number two, the universe had a beginning. Even the scientists will tell you, even those folks that say it's been here, that the material of it, the innate material of the universe has been here forever. It wasn't until the Big Bang that the universe came into existence like we know it, living, expanding, growing, and evolving. So everything that exists has a cause. The universe had a beginning, and therefore the universe has to have a cause. It's very simple logic. You can't have anything without a cause, and the beginning is the universe had a beginning. So what is the cause that caused the universe? It has to have one. It can't just be because. It's not a because, it's a cause. So you begin to look at that. That whole premise fails. Besides that, and we'll look at this for a second, I talked about this last week on page 33. There are multiple laws of science. Remember, we talked about the concept of a law, a theory, and a hypothesis. The law of gravity. There are several theories out there that are looked at. The theory of time travel, the theory of some other things that are in place. But there are laws of physics that have to do with heat, matter, energy, time. Those are laws. They're unbreakable. They're unbendable. And so when we look at some laws that are observable and understood qualities of our universe, we know these are in place. They are factual evidences that are there. They can be observed. They can be participated in. And so they're not ideas, they're not concepts, they're not hypotheses, they're not theories, but they're facts. There are two laws of thermodynamics. Now stop a second. What is thermodynamics? What a great question. It comes from two words. Thermo has to do with heat. A bomb that's thermonuclear is not explosive TNT, but it is a process of producing great amounts of heat through a thermal reaction. So thermodynamics is the processes or the actions of a product or of a element. And so thermodynamics is two basic laws that are in place. You part of that. You live in the laws of thermodynamics. You don't get around them. And so as you look at those, for them to be there, them to be evidence, those things they can be proven through repetition and through observance. The first one is this. The first law of thermodynamics points to the reality that no energy can be created or destroyed. That means this: the amount of energy in the world today, there's stored energy, and then there's active energy, kinetic energy. This morning on the way to school, you stopped somewhere, donut shop. You stopped at to get some coffee. You got your favorite coffee. When you got it, there's energy in it. If you ate a breakfast sandwich, or you ate a donut or a croissant or something like that, in it were nutrients that you took into your body. There was also sugar. Some of you took in way too much sugar, but there's sugar that's in there. When it gets into your body, it's processed and it's used then as the fuel or the energy that your body uses to expend. Now, because you expended that energy does not mean that energy ceases to exist. It simply takes a different shape. And having said that, that means this: however much energy is in the universe, I'm not talking about in you, I'm not talking about in the school, I'm talking at Texas, but in the entirety of the universe. You remember the big circle that we put on the board? All of the energy that's in there has been there from the beginning. The amount of energy cannot be increased or decreased. That means if I could go back in time to 15,000 years ago, the same amount of energy that's in the world today was in the world then. Now, having said that, it does change forms and it does transition throughout all that, but it's never destroyed. It never goes away. It just changes in its form and its productivity. Okay, so that's a law. If it had been here, if the world started with nothing and came into something, somewhere that energy that was not there had to come into existence. Okay, so that's the first law. The second law of thermodynamics simply stated all matter is losing its energy and will ultimately wind down. Back in the day, now I know none of you have it, maybe you've seen one. I think somewhere, let me see if I can find it right quick, because I have something I'll show you, and you'll see this again later. But this is the pocket watch. And a pocket watch, when you open it, tells time. I know you can't see it, probably from where you are because of the way the screen is set up. But if you take the back of this thing off, and I don't know if I can get it off or not, but inside are gears and a spring. And rather than having batteries, if you wanted to keep your clock running, there's a little handle on the top that you would turn. And as you turned it, it would wind the spring and compress it. And then the compression of that spring, the energy of that spring would be released in a very slow process to cause the wheels to turn in sequence in a time frame that would match the passing of our existence, minutes, seconds, hours, and days. And as such, you could keep this thing going. In my office, which I don't think you could probably see if I showed it to you right now, is a old-fashioned grandfather clock. It's mechanical. There's nothing electric about it. They were around long before we had electricity, but there's big weights on chains. And to keep the clock wound, you pull the chain and it picks the weight up. And then over the passage of time, at a very slow process, because the weight pulling on the chain pulls on the cogs and the gears, and they begin to click off in a sequential time that matches the passing of our existence. And therefore, the energy that's stored in that weight is transferred into the movement of those dials on the clock. Now, having said all that, that means this, that while the energy is there, it is also beginning to wind down. It is not the same. It is not the same amount of energy as was in the other, as it was before. The fact that the universe is still active. Now, ultimately, if you don't wind the clock, if I don't wind this, if I don't wind my chains on my grandfather clock, if you've ever had one of those little wind-up toys that you can set on the counter and it bobs around or moves or whatever, you put batteries in a flashlight. There's stored energy in that, but once you turn the light on, that energy transfers over and lights up the light. What happens if you don't replace those batteries? What happens if I don't wind this clock? Ultimately, all of the energy that was stored in it dissipates and it stops. The second law of thermodynamics says that when everything began, it had X amount of energy. X amount of energy is still in the world today, first law of biogenesis, but it is winding down. And if after this long, 15 billion years, at the known rates, there should be no energy left that's usable in the world today. It should all be gone. You shouldn't be able to get up and walk. You shouldn't be able to talk. You shouldn't be able to have any energy left at all. The trees shouldn't grow. The rains shouldn't come. There should be absolutely no energy. By the way, not only in the earth, but in the universe. That means that gravity would be shifted. The energy of the sun would have been expended. All of those kinds of things to the point that there would be no energy left. Now, you know this, I hope. The energy of our sun is being expended, and we'll talk about this a little bit later on, at a given rate. And we can know what that rate is because we've measured it. That means this, if we know that the energy of the sun, because of the second law of thermodynamics, because energy produces heat, after a period of time, and the truth is this, at some point in time in the future, our sun is going to burn out. It's going to quit working. The energy is going to be expanded. and everything in our universe will cease to have any ability to have life, including Earth. Now, when will that be? A long, long, long time. You don't have to spend any time worrying about it tonight or tomorrow. Not you, not your kids, not your grandkids, not your great-great-grandkids. But way on down in the future, the sun will begin to decrease in energy. And as it begins to decrease in energy, the amount of heat that it produces will begin to subside. And life on planet Earth will get very, very, very cold and ultimately die out. Okay? Second law of thermodynamics. If the universe were billions and billions of years old, there should have been a state of equilibrium. That means everything's leveled out so that there's just nothing. But it's not. There is plenty of usable energy left, which says this: an ancient Earth is not possible. Now, the next one, which is on page 33, is called the law of entropy. And by the way, you ought to circle these, because I would feel like that probably in the near future, the first and second law of thermodynamics and the law of entropy, you're going to see those again as we go forward. The law of entropy states that everything must exist in a form that moves from complicated to simple and never the other direction. That means this: stuff wears out. Not only does the energy wear out, but stuff wears out. We talked a little bit about this not long ago. Why do old people their bodies not work like they used to? Why can't I go out and run 5 miles today? Why don't I have any hair? Why is the coloring of my beard and what hair I have not the color it was when I was younger? The truth is this: the law of entropy says things that are complex break down. When a tree dies or gets blown over in the hurricane, and you let it lay there for a period of time, it begins to rot. The nutrients that it took in while it was alive no longer come in, and all of the cells in the tree die. And as it dies, it begins to decay, and ultimately it just rots into dead wood. And ultimately, after a period of time, just goes back to being part of the earth. The same thing with animals and people when we die. The human body begins, after it breaks down, it gets older, it quits working. When most people die, you get put in a casket, they put you in the ground, they seal you in there, and within a period of time, you begin to. By the way, you begin to decay. Your body begins to decay within a couple of hours after you're dead, and within a few days, it decays greatly. Now, when we find bones, and when we find skeletons from hundreds and thousands of years ago, it's because they were preserved. Even if they've been mummified, some of the mummies that they found some of the amazing ability of people to keep them from quote unquote rotting. They mummify them, but everything breaks down, and as it does, the law of entropy is at work. So if the universe were literally billions and billions of years old, a forever universe there shouldn't be anything living today. Because here's what the Darwinian theology or Darwinian science says: we started with simple, and everything got more complex, more complex, more complex, more complex. We went from a quark to a molecule, to a single cell being, to a multi-cell being, to a bacteria, to this, to that. Ultimately, over millions and millions of years, the tree of life expanded into all the things that we see out there today, and things we haven't yet discovered. Every part of that flies absolutely in the face of the law of entropy, because it doesn't go from simple to complex. It goes from complex to simple. We talked last week, if I had a new car, we took it and I don't know if it was Cheeto or somebody, we talked about taking their brand new car they just paid for and setting it out in the front yard and just walking off and leaving it, in 30 years coming back. You're going to find a lot of things different about it. One of the things that's different about vehicles today versus what they were 50, 60, 75 years ago is there's way less quote unquote steel in the cars today. There's more fiber, there's more plexiglass, there's more, whatever. But everything will ultimately break down and rust. Everything will just decay. The tires will rot. All the hoses will rot. Everything. That's the law of entropy. If it works in a period of just a few years, over millions and millions and billions of years, there shouldn't be anything alive here today. And so that flies in the face of an eternal earth. And the last one on that page is the law of biogenesis. And biogenesis literally means this: there's no living matter that can be produced unless it's produced by other living matter. Some of you, and I don't know this, but some of you, your parents may have deceased. But here's the truth: when you were produced, they were both alive. Why? Because dead matter can't produce living matter. We'll talk about this a little bit later, but I'll just share this with you today. In the 1700s in Paris, there were no toilets in the city. Now, if you grew up in the country, and I did grow up in the country, I grew up as a little boy, we didn't have running water. We didn't have indoor plumbing. When you had to go to the restroom, you had to go out down a path past the chicken coop to what we called an outhouse. And it was basically a little small wooden building that when you opened the door, there was a bench with a hole cut in it. And that hole that was there allowed you to sit on it. And when you had to take care of your business, as you did it went down into a big hole at the bottom that would just open. Most of them were 4 to 5 foot deep and 2 or 3 foot wide, that's just what happened. There was no way to flush it. Everything just went down in it. And in order to help keep some of that from building up so fast, we kept a bag of lye. And you'd sprinkle that in there every now and then to help dissolve part of that. But in France, now that was in the country. In the city, in the great big city of London or of Paris, there were no outhouses. And so everybody at night had what they called a chamber pot. Basically, there was a bowl about a foot around and about this deep, and there was water in it, and then there was a little basin that kept the water in the basin. You could pour it to wash your face and do all those kinds. But there was also a pot probably about this tall, 8 to 10 inches, and it had a big opening. And at night, when you had to go to the bathroom, whether you had to do number 1 or number 2, you had to tinkle or poop, you did it in the pot. But in the mornings when you got up, you would take it and dump it in a street next to the curb or the area right there. And so everybody in the city did that. No wonder the disease was so rampant. But then there were groups of men whose job was to come by with a cart and with the shovels and brooms and pick all that stuff up and take it out to the refuse, like the dump, and they would dump it, and then they would burn it. But there was such a health plague of flies and rats and those kinds of things, and you can understand why. That it was determined that the poo was producing the rats and the flies. And that became the science of the day. They had to find a way to confine the poop so that the rats and the flies that it produced, that it turned in somehow to rats and flies that were affecting the city. Well, there was a scientist who said, I can't buy that. His name was Fabrici. And so he had some of his helpers. I don't know if they put on gloves or boots or whatever, but they went out and they collected some of that fresh refuse, put it in a container and sealed it. They watched it for a couple of days, and not one single fly or gnat or rat was produced. And what he concluded was that premise of how the rats and the flies got there couldn't be true, because it was not living material, it was dead material. Now, when they went back out to the dump, the flies would light on it. They would lay their larvae, and in 2 or 3 days, it would be full of maggots. So there was living material living off of the innate dead material, but it was not being produced by the dead material. And so the whole concept of biogenesis says this: nothing that's alive can be produced by innate material. And that is exactly what this whole concept of evolution, of this long-term evolutionary model says, that there was nothing. It was all dead. Something happened and it produced living material, which is completely, absolutely impossible according to the laws of science. And therefore, in all of that, there is absolutely no way, there's no way that the concept of it developed here could be in place. It's not always been here, and it couldn't develop here, okay? Now, there's a set of review questions on page 33. By the way, it's the wrong questions. One of the changes that I've got to make when I rewrite this book is to address that issue. So don't pay any attention to it, okay? At the bottom of that page is homework assignment. It has to do with the cosmological argument, or the Kalam argument. It's at the YouTube page, the website, www.reasonablefaith.org/Kalam. There's parts 1 and 2. Your homework assignment is this: you need to watch both those parts and give me a 2-page report describing what this argument details and why it is solid evidence to point to the flaws of a forever universe. Okay? That will be your homework for next week. Okay? Now, having said all that, we're going to let you stop here, and next week I'll be back and we'll pick up on chapter 4. Allison, thank you for taking good care of us. Guys, we'll see you next time. Have a great day.